All right, my friends, in this video, we're going to start working on our next application to get a better idea of how Redux works. I'm going to first begin by talking about the application we're going to build and some of the objectives inside of it, and really highlight what we're going to try to understand inside the Redux world. So let's get to it. Now, first off, a little bit of a disclaimer here. I feel compelled to tell you this. The application we're going to be building is going to be a little bit plain, and it's going to remind you of some of the very simple applications we worked on back when we were talking about React earlier on inside this course. But this application is going to be very plain for a very good reason. We're going to be talking about some pretty complex things and complex topics in the Redux world. I'll be completely honest with you, I actually already recorded this video and the next about 70 or so building a completely different application. So I already recorded one version of this application, and the app was really complicated. And I can even show you proof. Here's all the videos from the initial version of this app that I put together. And the app that it showed was really complicated. And at the end of the day, even though the app was more interesting, it ended up being really, really challenging to understand what is going on. So the purpose of this app is to teach you more about Redux, and having a neat application is really kind of like a side concern. We're really not concerned with making a super awesome app just yet because we're still in this learning mode of sorts. Remember, right now, as far as difficulty curve around Redux goes, we're still at this upper plateau right here, and we need to get over to this kind of big dip as soon as we possibly can. So this is going to be the last kind of boring application, and then I promise you we're going to look at some really interesting apps. Okay, so enough of that. What are we going to build? And what's our goals here? So the big goals for this application, we need to really understand the purpose of reducers. We've already taken a look at a couple of reducers. I gave you an analogy of how they work, and we put together some code for one or two. But in this application, I want you to get a crystal clear understanding of the purpose of reducers and exactly how they work internally. We're going to eventually take a look at some of the Redux source code so that you can understand behind the scenes exactly what a reducer is doing. Next up, we're going to get total understanding on how we make API requests with Redux. So we're going to reach to some outside API, get some data, and return it back into our Redux application, and then somehow work with it in some fashion. And then finally, we're going to start to understand the purpose of middleware inside of Redux, specifically a middleware called Redux Thunk. We haven't spoken about middleware at all just yet, so that's going to be a big new topic. All right, so that's our big goals. So now, with all that build up, let me show you this application. So yeah, this is it. Like I said, pretty straightforward. We're going to essentially be rendering a list of blog posts on the screen that we're going to fetch from some outside API. So we're going to have a series of elements here. Each one is going to show the title of a blog post, the body of the blog post, like the actual content, and then underneath that, we'll put some author's name. And then on the left-hand side over here is going to be just a simple icon, not a picture, just a simple icon. So yeah, like I said, the application itself is very boring, but our goals here are to really understand Redux. And once we get this really great understanding, then we're going to focus on building the cool apps. All right, so thinking about this application, I think that we only need two distinct components to really put this together. We're going to make a component called the post list, which is going to render the entire list of blog posts. And then very interestingly, this is going to be kind of a non-standard thing that we do. We're going to render the author's name right here, like that single little div with some text inside of it from a component that we're going to call the user header. Now, the reason we're going to split that off into a separate component is going to be a lot more obvious once we start to take a look at how we fetch data from an outside API and make use of it inside of our application. So for right now, we'll just say, yeah, we're going to kind of have this interesting component set up, but the reason that we're splitting out that single little header to a separate component is going to be obvious in just a little bit. All right, so now the next thing I want to show you very quickly is where we are going to fetch this data from. Remember, we're going to get this list of blog posts to show on the screen from some outside API. So we're going to be putting together our application. We're going to use Axios to make a request over to a free public service called the JSON Placeholder API. The JSON Placeholder API is not terribly unlike that Faker module that we worked with much earlier in the course. It essentially just has a bunch of fake data that we can freely request and get access to and load up into our application. Very commonly used anytime that you just need some stand-in source of information to kind of demonstrate how making API requests work. Let's very quickly take a look at some of the documentation around that API. So we can go to jsonplaceholder.typeicode.com. I'm going to take that link, open up a new tab, and head on over to it. All right, so this is the JSON Placeholder API. we can take a look a little bit down here and find a section called resources. So these are 6 different endpoints that we can make requests to get back a ton of fake data. The ones that we are going to care about is the posts endpoint right here and the users endpoint right here. So if I click on posts in a new tab, it'll open up a whole bunch of JSON like you see right here. Now notice on my screen, this is all formatted nice and pretty. It is because I have a Chrome extension that automatically formats JSON data on the screen. So when I take a look at this list of posts right here, you'll see that every post object has a title, has a body, the post itself has an ID, and then it also has a reference to the user who created the post as well. So in this case, user with ID 1 created this blog post, this blog post, this blog post, and like basically the first 10 or so on here, and then eventually it flips on over to blog post created by user with ID number 2. So if we want to figure out who each of those users are, we would have to make a second request over to this users endpoint. So I can click on users, open it up in a new tab, and now this will show me a list of different users that can be returned from this API. So here's a user with ID 1. So in that case, it's Leanne Graham. And again, this is a fake person. So Leanne Graham is the person who created this blog post, this one, and so on. And then as you might imagine, we can go down here a little bit more and see who created blog post number, or excuse me, the author with ID number 2. That is the person who created all of these blog posts down here, the ones with user ID of 2, 2, 2, and so on. So this source of data is going to be pretty straightforward. The only complication here is that essentially there's 2 separate endpoints that we're going to have to make requests to get all the information that we need to show this list of blog posts on the screen. We're going to first have to make a request to just get the list of blog posts, and then we'll have to make a follow-up request to get each individual author's name to show on there. But we'll get into the details on that on just a little bit. For right now, let's flip back over to our terminal, and we're going to generate a new project, and then we'll start working on it in the next video. All right, so you'll notice that I've already changed back to my workspace directory of sorts right here. So inside this folder, I'm going to create React app, and we're going to call this application not business. Originally, I'd kind of wanted this to be like a business-themed application, but instead it's really a list of blog posts. So let's just call it blog, like so. All right, so that's going to fetch a couple dependencies for us. Let's take a pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to start working on our application.